The man's hand connected with Ivy's shoulder, hard. 21 years old, working double shifts to pay for her dying mother's medicine, and now she was pinned against the table while two men laughed. The diner went silent. Then her sister stood up. They saw the nurse scrubs, the tired eyes, the small frame. What they didn't see was the 8 years before the hospital. The years that taught her 37 ways to end a fight without throwing a punch. In 12 seconds, everything would change. But first, you need to know how a promise between two sisters became a viral moment that destroyed one life and saved another. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. The fluorescent lights of the Redmore Diner buzzed softly against the darkness outside. It was 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and inside the chrome and vinyl sanctuary that had served travelers and locals for 40 years, tension hung in the air like smoke. Two men sat at table 9, sprawled across the red vinyl booth like they owned the place. Jake, 28 years old, 6'3", 240 pounds of ex-college football player who still thought his glory days mattered, laughed too loud at his own joke. His buddy Marcus, 26 and always content to play second fiddle, laughed right along with him, because that's what Marcus did. He followed. He enabled. He made Jake feel invincible. They'd been there for 2 hours. 2 full hours of ordering rounds of burgers and fries and shakes, of talking over other customers, of making crude jokes that carried across the diner. The kind of jokes that made elderly couples look down at their coffee. The kind that made young families gather their children a little closer. And with each passing minute, they'd gotten louder, older, more convinced that this small-town diner and everyone in it existed for their entertainment. Ivy Lane moved through the narrow aisle between tables with practiced efficiency, her 21-year-old frame somehow both fragile and determined. She'd been on her feet for 6 hours already, and the ache in her lower back was a constant companion she'd learned to ignore. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had started the shift neat and was now slightly disheveled. There were grease stains on her apron, and her name tag, IVY, in cheerful red letters, sat crooked on her uniform. She approached table 9 with 3 plates balanced on her left arm, her right hand gripping a tray of drinks. This was her 3rd trip to their table in the last hour. They'd ordered everything, eaten everything, and tipped nothing. She set down the plates without a word, her jaw tight, her eyes focused on the table rather than the men. Jake's hand shot out as she turned to leave, fingers wrapping around her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to stop her. Firm enough to remind her who had the power in this moment. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his breath heavy with beer and entitlement. "How about a smile? Service with a smile, right?" Ivy pulled her hand back gently but deliberately. "Can I get you anything else?" Her voice was steady, professional. Everything her older sister had taught her about staying calm under pressure, about not giving bullies the reaction they wanted. Marcus snickered into his drink, and Jake released her wrist with a grin that said he could have held on longer if he'd wanted to. She walked back to the counter, her shoulders straight, her hands trembling just slightly as she set down the empty tray. Jerry, the night manager, 63 years old with silver hair and tired eyes that had seen too many nights like this, watched from behind the register. He'd owned this diner for 18 years, and he'd dealt with difficult customers before. But something about these two set his teeth on edge. Something about the way they looked at his staff. At Ivy. He glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. Time to close this out. He printed their bill, the receipt chattering out of the old machine, and walked toward table 9 with the kind of weariness that comes from decades of dealing with people who mistake kindness for weakness. He set the small black folder on the table between them, his voice polite but firm. "Gentlemen, your bill comes to $67.50. Jake didn't even look at it. He leaned back in the booth, arms stretched across the back of the vinyl, taking up as much space as possible. His grin was all teeth and no warmth. "We'll pay when we feel like it, old man." Marcus laughed, that enabling, encouraging laugh that gave Jake permission to push further. Jerry felt the heat rise in his chest, that familiar cocktail of frustration and resignation. He'd been here before. He knew how this could go. His hand moved toward the phone mounted on the wall behind the counter, his fingers already reaching for the receiver to call the police. That's when Jake stood up. All 6'3", 240 pounds of him rose from the booth like a threat made flesh. The diner seemed to shrink around him. Other customers, an elderly couple in the corner booth, a truck driver at the counter, a young woman studying in booth 3, all went very still, the way prey animals freeze when a predator moves. And in that moment, everyone in the Redmore diner understood the same thing. This situation was about to get physical. If you've ever been disrespected at work and couldn't fight back, if you've ever watched someone abuse their size and power because they thought no one would stop them, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now, because these bullies have absolutely no idea what's coming. What happens next will change everything. But to understand why it matters, you need to know the promise that was made 6 months before this night. The promise that would turn a viral moment into something much bigger. 6 months earlier, the world looked very different for Ivy and Mara Lane. The hospital room was small and sterile, painted in that particular shade of pale green that's supposed to be calming, but only serves as a reminder that you're in a place where bad news gets delivered. Afternoon sunlight filtered through Venetian blinds, casting stripes across the linoleum floor and the single bed where their mother lay, looking smaller than either of them remembered. Margaret Lane, 54 years old, a woman who'd raised 2 daughters alone after her husband died in a car accident 2 years prior, stared at the ceiling tiles as if she could find answers in the water-stained patterns. The doctor had left 10 minutes ago. Stage 3. Aggressive treatment needed. Long road ahead. The words hung in the air like a sentence none of them wanted to acknowledge. Ivy sat in the chair closest to the bed, her hands gripping her mother's with the kind of desperation that comes from watching your world crumble for the second time in 2 years. At 21, she'd already lost her father, already put her college dreams on hold to help with bills, already learned that life doesn't care about your plans. Tears streamed down her face silently, the kind of crying that comes when you're too exhausted to make sound. Mara stood by the window, 29 years old, and wearing her nurse scrubs from the hospital 3 blocks away, where she'd been working a double shift when Ivy called. Her jaw was set, her eyes fixed on something beyond the glass, because if she looked at her mother, if she really looked, she might fall apart, and Mara Lane didn't fall apart. She'd learned a long time ago, in places far from here, that falling apart wasn't an option when people depended on you. The treatment is expensive, their mother said finally, her voice small and tired. Even with insurance, the copays, the medications. I don't know how we'll manage. Ivy squeezed her mother's hand tighter. We'll figure it out. I can pick up more shifts at the diner. You're supposed to be in college, Margaret interrupted, and there was steel beneath the weakness in her voice. Your father and I saved for years so you could go to school, so you wouldn't have to. Dad's gone, Mom. Ivy's voice cracked, and that money went to his funeral and keeping the house. College can wait. But Mara heard what her sister wasn't saying. College can wait meant college might never happen. It meant Ivy's dreams of becoming a teacher, of getting out of Redmore, of building a life beyond waitressing and struggling, all of it disappearing into medical bills and survival. She turned from the window, her decision already made. No, Mara said, and both women looked at her. Ivy's going to college. I'll handle Mom's treatment. I'll pick up extra shifts, overtime, whatever it takes. Ivy shook her head. Mara, you're already working yourself to death. I'm serious. Mara moved to the bed, kneeling between her mother and sister so she could look them both in the eyes. I'll get you through school, Ivy. No matter what. That's a promise. And she meant it. Every word. 3 weeks later, Ivy started at the Redmore diner. Not instead of college, but alongside applications and financial aid forms and scholarship essays written at 3 in the morning after her shift ended. Every tip went into a glass jar on her dresser, a mason jar with a label written in Mara's handwriting. Ivy's college fund. By the time that night at the diner arrived 6 months later, that jar held $3,247. Every single dollar earned through sore feet and fake smiles and customers who sometimes tipped well and sometimes didn't tip at all. Mara kept her own promise too. She picked up every extra shift offered, worked holidays and weekends, took on the cases no one else wanted, the difficult patients, the long nights, the emergencies that stretched from sunset to sunrise. Her colleagues called her dedicated. Her supervisor called her invaluable. What they didn't know was that she was driven by something deeper than professional pride. She was driven by a promise made in a hospital room to a little sister who'd already sacrificed too much. But late at night, When Mara returned to her small one-bedroom apartment exhausted and aching, when she'd kick off her nursing shoes and collapse onto her couch, still wearing scrubs that smelled of antiseptic and coffee, she would sometimes find herself staring at the space under her bed. At a locked metal box she hadn't opened in 8 years. A box containing medals she'd earned in places whose names were classified. Commendations for actions she'd never discuss. Photographs of a younger version of herself in tactical gear, standing alongside people who'd become like family, fighting battles that never made the news. A life she'd walked away from. Mara had left that world deliberately, had chosen healing over hurting, had traded combat boots for nursing shoes because she'd seen enough violence to last 3 lifetimes. She'd built a new identity as someone who saved lives instead of taking them. Someone peaceful. Someone safe. She thought she'd never need those skills again. She thought wrong. Because 6 months after making that promise in a hospital room, on a Tuesday night in a small-town diner, her sister would need protecting. And Mara would have to become, for just 8 seconds, the person she used to be. The person she'd buried beneath scrubs and compassion and years of choosing peace. And that choice, that moment of becoming, would cost her everything she'd built and give her family everything they needed. To understand who Mara Lane became, you need to understand who she was before she ever put on a nurse's uniform. At 18 years old, fresh out of high school in Redmore with a father who'd served in the Marines and a restlessness she couldn't name, Mara enlisted. Not because she wanted to follow in her father's footsteps exactly, but because she wanted to prove something to herself, that she was capable of more than this small town expected, that she could be extraordinary. What happened over the next 8 years is the kind of story that doesn't get told at family dinners. Mara didn't just serve, she excelled. Within 2 years, she'd been selected for specialized training that most soldiers never even hear about. Programs with names that can't be spoken. Units that don't officially exist. She learned close-quarters combat from instructors who'd seen action in every conflict zone you can name and a dozen you can't. She learned how to read a room in 3 seconds, identify threats in 4, neutralize them in 5. She learned tactical response, hostage rescue, high-value target protection. She learned 37 different ways to end a fight without throwing a single punch. But more than that, and this is what separated Mara from others with the same training, she learned restraint. Her instructors drilled it into her until it became instinct. Control, not kill. Neutralize, don't destroy. The hardest part of being a warrior isn't learning how to hurt people. It's learning when not to. She deployed 4 times. Saw combat in places whose names are still redacted from official records. Earned commendations she keeps in a locked box and never talks about. Her team called her ice, because while others would escalate under pressure, Mara would go perfectly calm. Clinical. Precise. She could walk into chaos and bring order through sheer force of will and training. But there's a cost to that kind of work. A price paid in nightmares and hypervigilance and the weight of actions you can never undo. By the time Mara was 26, she'd seen enough violence for 3 lifetimes. Enough death. Enough of what humans are capable of doing to each other when all the civilized layers get stripped away. So she made a choice. Honorable discharge. Full benefits. A clean exit from a world that had shaped her into something lethal and efficient and utterly exhausted. She left the service with the respect of her commanding officers and the gratitude of a country that would never know her name. And she made herself a promise. I spent 8 years learning how to hurt people. I wanted to spend the rest of my life healing them. She enrolled in an accelerated nursing program. Threw herself into anatomy and pharmacology and patient care with the same intensity she'd once applied to tactical training. Found that the skills transferred in unexpected ways. The ability to stay calm under pressure, to make split-second decisions, to prioritize and triage and never panic when everything around you is falling apart. By the time she joined the staff at Redmore General Hospital 3 years later, she'd transformed herself completely. Her colleagues knew her as the nurse who never panicked during emergencies. The one who could talk down aggressive patients with just her voice and body language. The one who volunteered for the trauma cases that made other nurses nervous. They called her unflappable, a natural, someone who just had the right temperament for emergency medicine. What they didn't know was why she never panicked. They didn't know about the box under her bed or the years before nursing school or the muscle memory that lived in her hands. Hands that could start in 4-line or compress a chest wound or control a hostile target's movement with equal precision. She seemed like just another dedicated healthcare worker. Scrubs and a stethoscope and a warm smile for patients. Someone who'd bring you extra blankets and advocate for your pain medication and hold your hand when you were scared. But late at night, in the garage of her small apartment building, there hung a heavy bag that showed the wear of regular use. Mara would go there after particularly hard shifts, still in her scrubs, and work through combinations her hands remembered from another life. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut, elbow strikes and knee strikes and footwork that flowed like water. She told herself it was just exercise, just stress relief, just a way to stay in shape. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. You can leave that life, but that life never entirely leaves you. The training stays in your nervous system. The awareness stays in the way you scan rooms. The readiness stays in the coil of your muscles, waiting. Her colleagues knew her as the nurse who never panicked during emergencies. What they didn't know was why she never panicked. That secret, that hidden history, that buried identity, was about to go viral. About to be captured on 4 different phones and watched by millions of people who would ask the same question. Who exactly is this woman, and where did she learn to move like that? If you believe in second chances, if you believe in people who fight for their family when it matters most, comment, "I stand with Mara right now." Let's show her that her story matters, because what she did to protect her sister is about to cost her everything. By 11:15 that Tuesday night, Mara Lane had been on her feet for 14 hours straight. It had been one of those shifts that tested even her considerable reserves of patience and stamina. A multi-car pileup on the highway brought in 6 trauma cases within 20 minutes of each other. An elderly man with chest pain who kept pulling out his 4 because he was convinced the hospital was trying to poison him. A young mother in labor whose baby decided to arrive 3 weeks early and in a hurry. The kind of shift where you don't sit down, don't eat, barely have time to use the bathroom, and certainly don't have a moment to think about anything beyond the immediate crisis in front of you. But Mara had made it work the way she always did. Calm under pressure. Efficient. The kind of nurse who could start in 4-line on a screaming toddler while simultaneously giving instructions to a new resident and comforting a terrified parent. Her supervisor had actually stopped her in the hallway around 10:30 and said, "Mara, you've been here since 9 this morning. Take your break. That's an order." So at 11:20, Mara pulled out her phone in the staff lounge, her fingers still smelling faintly of antiseptic despite 3 hand washings, and sent a text to her sister. "Taking my break. Coming to see you. Need coffee and your smile." Ivy's response came back immediately. "Best news all night. Your usual waiting." The Redmore Diner was only 4 blocks from the hospital, close enough that half the night shift nursing staff made it their regular haunt, drawn by 24-hour service and coffee that was terrible but strong. Mara walked through the cool October night, still wearing her scrubs, her hospital badge clipped to her chest, her body aching in that familiar way that came with long shifts. But the thought of seeing Ivy, of sitting down for 20 minutes in a booth that felt more like home than her own apartment, made the walk feel shorter. She pushed through the diner's glass door at 11:35, and immediately the smell of coffee and frying bacon and that particular combination of grease and nostalgia that defined every small-town diner wrapped around her like a blanket. The place was maybe a third full. The usual late-night crowd of truckers and insomniacs, and people whose lives ran on schedules that didn't match the rest of the world. Ivy spotted her immediately and broke into a smile that made Mara's entire day worth it. Her little sister, though at 21, Ivy hated being called little, navigated through the narrow aisles with a coffee pot in one hand and a genuine warmth that seemed impossible after a 6-hour shift of her own. She slid into the booth across from Mara without asking, because this was their ritual. This was their moment. "Rough night?" Ivy asked, already pouring coffee into a mug that had seen better decades. "Multi-car pileup, early delivery, and a patient who was convinced we were part of a government conspiracy." Mara wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into her palms. "You?" Tuesday night crowd. Truckers who tip well and businessmen who don't. Ivy's smile flickered for just a second, and Mara caught it. That micro-expression that spoke of exhaustion deeper than just tired feet. But before she could ask, Ivy brightened again and pulled something from her apron pocket. A photo on her phone. Mom's latest text. She's complaining about her physical therapist, which the doctor says is actually a good sign. means she's feeling well enough to be annoyed. They both laughed, and Mara felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Their mother was 6 months into treatment now, and the prognosis had shifted from dire to cautiously optimistic. The chemotherapy was working. The tumor markers were down. She was fighting, and she was winning. Speaking of fighting, Ivy said, and now her smile was pure pride as she pulled out her phone again. This time she showed Mara a photo of a glass jar, the same mason jar that had been on her dresser for months. $3,891. I counted it this morning. Mara stared at the number, doing the math in her head. That was nearly $700 more than 6 weeks ago. Ivy, that's incredible. Maybe by fall, Ivy said, and her voice carried a hope that was almost painful to hear. Maybe I can start part-time at the community college. Just 2 classes. Financial aid might cover the rest if I can show I'm serious, that I've been saving. You'll get there, Mara interrupted, reaching across the table to squeeze her sister's hand. I promise you'll get there. But as their hands touched, Mara noticed the way Ivy's fingers were slightly swollen, the way she shifted in the booth like she was trying to find a position that didn't hurt, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes despite the hope in her voice. You okay? Mara asked quietly. Just tired. Ivy pulled her hand back, reaching for her coffee pot like she needed something to do with her hands. Some customers are rough. You know how it is. Mara did know, but something in the way Ivy said it, the way she didn't quite meet Mara's eyes, made the old instincts stir. The ones that read body language and micro-expressions and all the little signals people give off when they're not telling the whole truth. That's when she heard it. Loud laughter from across the diner. Male voices, too loud for the late hour, carrying that particular edge that came from too much alcohol and too much entitlement. Mara's eyes tracked automatically to table 9, where 2 men sprawled across a booth like they owned it. The bigger one, 6'3" if he was an inch, football player build, the kind of guy who'd probably peaked in college and never gotten over it, had his arms stretched across the back of the booth, taking up space just because he could. His friend was smaller but cut from the same cloth, laughing at everything the big one said with the enthusiasm of someone who'd built an identity around being the sidekick. Mara read the situation in 3 seconds flat. Drunk, but not falling down drunk. Entitled. Aggressive. The kind of men who saw service workers as things rather than people. The big one's body language was all dominance display. Spread knees, loud voice, constant movement designed to draw attention. The friend mirrored him, emboldened by association. And they'd been looking at Ivy. Mara could see it in the way her sister's shoulders tensed slightly whenever she had to walk past their table, the way she navigated the diner to avoid their section unless absolutely necessary. Escalating. That was the word that popped into Mara's head, pulled from years of training and threat assessment. The situation at table 9 was escalating, and men like that, drunk, entitled, working each other up. They didn't de-escalate on their own. They pushed until someone pushed back. Mara squeezed her sister's hand one more time, pulling Ivy's attention back from wherever it had drifted. You're the strongest person I know, Ivy, she said, and meant every word. What Mara didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that in exactly 12 minutes, her little sister would need every ounce of that strength. And Mara would need to become someone she'd buried 8 years ago, someone she'd promised herself she'd never be again. 12 minutes. That's all the peace they had left. The deterioration happened the way these things always do, gradually, then suddenly. Jake's voice got louder first. What had been obnoxious conversation became performative shouting, each sentence delivered like he was playing to an audience that didn't want to watch. He was telling some story about his college football days, about a game where he'd sacked the quarterback twice, and Marcus was nodding along with the enthusiasm of someone who'd heard the story a dozen times but knew his role was to act impressed. Then Jake's hand shot out, deliberately, with the kind of casual cruelty that comes from someone who's never faced real consequences, and knocked over a water glass. It hit the table, tipped, and sent a cascade of ice water and melting cubes across the surface and onto the floor. The crash silenced the diner for exactly 3 seconds before Jake's laughter filled the void. Oops, he said, not sorry at all. Ivy appeared within 30 seconds, the way good servers always do, armed with a towel and a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She didn't say a word, didn't scold or sigh or show any reaction at all. She just knelt down and started soaking up the water, picking up ice cubes with her bare hands, wiping down the table while Jake and Marcus watched her like it was entertainment. "Hey, sweetheart," Jake said, leaning forward so his face was closer to hers while she cleaned. "While you're down there, how about you bring us another round? And this time, try not to spill it." He'd spilled it. They both knew he'd spilled it. But the cruelty was the point. Ivy straightened up, towel dripping in her hands, and her voice came out steady. "I'll get you more water. Can I get you anything else?" "Yeah," Jake said, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made every woman in the diner tense with secondhand discomfort. "How about your number? You doing anything after your shift?" Marcus laughed, that enabling, encouraging laugh that gave Jake permission to push further. Then, as if remembering he should play the good cop, he added without any real conviction, "Come on, man, she's working. Leave her alone." But it wasn't a real objection. It was theater. The kind of half-hearted protest that actually signals to your friend that you're enjoying the show. Ivy walked away without responding, and from her booth, Mara watched her sister's shoulders. Saw the way they stayed straight through sheer force of will, the way Ivy's hand trembled slightly as she set down the wet towel behind the counter. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Jake and Marcus ordered another round of food, burgers and fries and shakes, the kind of order that said they weren't planning to leave anytime soon. Ivy brought it to them without comment, and they ate like men who'd never been told no in their lives. Other customers started finishing their meals and leaving, put off by the atmosphere, by the loud voices and the tension that hung in the air like humidity before a storm. By 11:47, the diner had emptied to just a handful of people. An elderly couple in the corner booth nursing coffee they didn't really want, but were afraid to leave while those men were still there. A truck driver at the counter who kept glancing at table 9 with the coiled readiness of someone deciding whether to get involved. A young woman in booth 3 with textbooks spread out in front of her, trying to study but not turning a single page. That's when Jerry decided enough was enough. The night manager approached table 9 with a small black folder containing their bill, his silver hair catching the fluorescent lights, his tired eyes carrying the weight of too many nights exactly like this one. He set the folder down between them with a gentleness that belied his frustration. "Gentlemen, your bill comes to $67.50. Jake didn't even look at it. He leaned back, arms spread across the booth, and grinned. "We'll pay when we feel like it, Grandpa." Jerry's jaw tightened. "Sir, it's closing time. I need you to settle your bill." "What are you going to do?" Jake's voice rose, aggressive now, the alcohol and audience turning him bold. "Call the cops on paying customers?" "You're not paying customers until you pay," Jerry said, and there was steel beneath the weariness in his voice. "I'm asking nicely. Please settle your bill and leave." That's when Jake stood up. All 6'3", 240 pounds of him rose from the booth like a threat made flesh. The air in the diner changed instantly. The elderly couple went rigid. The truck driver's hand moved toward his phone. The young woman with the textbooks gathered her things with shaking hands. Jake towered over Jerry, using every inch of his height to intimidate. "We'll leave when we're ready." Jerry, to his credit, didn't back down. His hand moved toward the phone on the wall behind the counter, his fingers already reaching to dial 911. He never made it. Jake's hand shot out and connected with Jerry's chest, not a punch, but a shove with all that football player strength behind it. The elderly manager stumbled backward, his hip connecting with the edge of the booth behind him. He caught himself before falling, but barely, and the shock on his face was painful to see. 63 years old, and he'd just been shoved by someone young enough to be his grandson. Marcus stood up too, positioning himself between Jerry and the phone. Not aggressive, exactly, but blocking, making it clear that Jerry's path to help was cut off, that they were in control now. "You really shouldn't have done that, old man," Jake said, and there was an edge in his voice that promised this wasn't over. The diner had gone completely silent. That terrible, breath-held silence of witnesses who know they're watching something wrong, but don't know if they're brave enough to stop it. That's when Ivy moved. She stepped out from behind the counter, her hands visibly shaking but her voice steady. 21 years old, 5'4", maybe 120 pounds soaking wet, and she walked directly toward two men who together outweighed her by more than 300 pounds. "Please," she said, and her voice carried across the silent diner. "Just pay your bill and go. We don't want trouble." It was everything Mara had taught her. Stay calm. Don't escalate. Use your voice. Appeal to their better nature. De-escalate, de-escalate, de-escalate. But Jake wasn't interested in de-escalation. Ivy's voice was steady, professional. Everything Mara had taught her about staying calm under pressure, about not giving bullies the reaction they wanted. But Jake wasn't calm. He wasn't interested in being reasonable, and he wasn't leaving. He was walking toward her with that predatory confidence of someone who'd never been stopped. And Marcus was right behind him, emboldened by his friend's aggression, playing his supporting role in whatever was about to happen. From her booth, Mara had stopped eating. Her fork was still in her hand, but she wasn't moving. She was watching, assessing. Her body language had changed completely. Spine straight, shoulders squared, weight balanced on the balls of her feet, even though she was sitting down. The nurse had disappeared. What remained was something older, something trained. She recognized the pattern immediately. Two aggressors coordinating. One dominant, one following. Both working together to intimidate and control. She saw how they were positioning themselves, how Jake was drawing attention while Marcus moved to block potential escape routes or intervention. She'd seen this exact dynamic in combat zones, in hostile situations, in scenarios where violence was inevitable unless someone intervened with skill and authority. And she saw her little sister standing between them and everyone else, trying to de-escalate a situation that was already beyond words. Mara set down her fork very carefully and stood up. Jake closed the distance between himself and Ivy in 3 long strides, and suddenly he was in her face. So close she could smell the beer on his breath, so close she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "What are you going to do about it, sweetheart?" His voice was low, dangerous, meant only for her, but loud enough that everyone in the diner could hear the threat beneath the words. Behind him, Marcus grinned, that awful, enabling grin of someone who knew exactly what was coming and was going to enjoy watching it happen. He positioned himself at an angle, playing his supporting role in whatever Jake had planned. Ivy's voice came out smaller than she wanted, but it came out. "I'm asking you to pay your bill and leave." Jake's hand shot out and wrapped around her wrist. Hard. His fingers dug into the soft flesh above her hand with enough force that she gasped, and when she tried to pull away, his grip only tightened. She could feel her pulse hammering against his thumb. "Let go," she said, pulling back with her whole body weight. He didn't let go. Marcus moved then, sliding around to Ivy's other side, and suddenly she was trapped between them. 2 men, both bigger, both blocking her paths of escape. The elderly couple in the corner booth sat frozen. The truck driver at the counter had his phone out, but hadn't moved. The young woman with the textbooks was already halfway to the door. Around the diner, other phones emerged from pockets and purses. The instinct of the modern age, when something terrible is happening, record it. Bear witness. Let the world see. Ivy twisted her wrist, trying the technique Mara had shown her once. Turned toward the thumb. It's the weakest point of any grip, but Jake was too strong and too drunk to feel the counter pressure. She backed away instead, pulling him with her, trying to get distance, trying to get space to breathe. Jake followed, and Marcus moved with him, and together they herded her backward toward the kitchen. She stumbled over her own feet, caught herself on the edge of a table, kept backing up because forward meant going through them, and that wasn't possible. "Please," she said again, and hated how her voice shook. "Just leave." "Maybe you should have been nicer," Jake said. "Maybe you should have smiled more." Then he shoved her, two-handed, violent, with all his weight behind it. Ivy flew backward. Her feet left the floor for just a second, and then she crashed into table 7 with devastating force. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Plates that had been stacked for washing shattered against the floor. Glasses exploded into fragments of crystal that scattered across linoleum. The sound was enormous in the small space, breaking, crashing, the percussion of violence. Ivy went down hard, her hip connecting with the floor, her hands landing in broken glass. Pain exploded up her side and across her palms. She tried to push herself up and her hand slipped in something wet. Coffee or water or blood, she couldn't tell. Above her, Marcus was laughing. That high, nervous laugh of someone who's gone too far, but can't stop now. Who's committed to the bit even though some part of him knows this has crossed the line. And Jake stood over her, 6'3" of entitled rage, looking down at this young woman he'd just thrown like a piece of furniture. "Maybe now you'll learn some respect," he said. For people were recording now. For phones held by shaking hands, capturing every angle. In 18 hours, 27 million people would watch what happened next. The video would be shared across every platform, analyzed frame by frame, turned into a cultural moment. But in this moment, this exact second, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Mara Lane was making a calculation. The same calculation she'd made in desert compounds and hostile territories and situations where civilians needed protecting. Intervene and expose everything she'd buried, the training, the skills, the person she used to be, or let her baby sister face this alone. Against two men who outweighed her by 300 pounds combined. Two men who clearly weren't done, who were standing over Ivy like predators over prey, deciding what came next. It wasn't really a choice at all. If you can't stand bullies who think they can hurt people without consequences, comment, more bullies, and share this video, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice. Mara stood up from her booth with no rush, no panic, no wasted movement. Just a smooth, deliberate rise that somehow commanded the attention of everyone in the diner. She set her coffee mug down carefully, adjusted her scrubs with one hand, and began walking toward her sister. The walk was different from how she'd moved earlier. There was something in her gait now, a fluidity, a precision, a kind of predatory calm that made the truck driver at the counter sit up straighter. She wasn't hurrying. She didn't need to. Every step was measured, purposeful, the walk of someone who'd already run through every possible scenario and knew exactly how each one would end. She positioned herself directly between Jake and Marcus and her sister on the ground, angling her body so both men were in her peripheral vision. Tactical positioning. Keep the threats in sight. Protect the civilian. The training was flooding back like muscle memory, and she let it come. "That's my sister," Mara said, and her voice cut through the diner like a blade. Quiet, but absolutely clear. "You both need to step back. Now." Jake looked at her like she'd just told a joke. This woman in nurse scrubs, maybe 5'6", couldn't weigh more than 130 soaking wet, telling him what to do. He actually laughed, and it was the ugliest sound, full of disbelief and mockery and the absolute certainty that nothing she could do would matter. "Or what?" he said, taking a step closer to her. "You gonna check my pulse, nurse?" Marcus moved in from her left side, grinning, emboldened by Jake's confidence. "2 against 1, sweetheart. You really want to do this?" Mara's head turned slightly, just enough to take in Marcus without losing sight of Jake. Her voice when she spoke was ice cold, each word deliberate and final. "2 against me? You're going to need more men." For just a second, something flickered across Marcus's face. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first hint of self-preservation instinct trying to break through the alcohol and bravado. But Jake was already committed, already too far gone in his own narrative to recognize danger when it stood calmly in front of him wearing hospital scrubs. Mara assessed them both with the clinical detachment of someone reading a medical chart. Jake, bigger, more aggressive, dominant personality, primary threat. He'd move first, come in hard, rely on size and strength. Marcus, follower, secondary threat, would hesitate, wait to see what Jake did before committing. She adjusted her stance accordingly, angling herself so Jake would have to come through her center line while she could intercept Marcus from the periphery. "Last chance," she said, and there was no emotion in her voice at all now. Just fact. Just certainty. Leave now, and this ends without anyone getting hurt. Jake reached for her, his hand extending toward her shoulder, probably planning to shove her aside the way he'd shoved Jerry, the way he'd shoved Ivy. It was instinct for him, this use of physical dominance. It had probably worked 1,000 times before. Big mistake. Marcus saw Jake move and started in from the side, coordinating the way they probably had in a dozen bar fights. 2 against 1, overwhelming force in numbers. They had no idea what they just triggered. Together, these two men outweighed Mara by over 300 pounds. Jake had played Division II football, had spent 4 years learning to use his body as a weapon on the field. Marcus had been in his share of bar fights, knew how to throw a punch, how to grapple, how to intimidate. They thought they knew what they were doing. They thought 2 against 1 meant they'd already won. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Mara Lane had trained with people who fought wars in places that don't exist on maps. With instructors who'd seen combat in every theater you can name and a dozen you can't. And she'd trained specifically for scenarios exactly like this one. Multiple hostile targets in confined space, protect the innocent, neutralize threats with minimal force. She'd run these drills hundreds of times until they became reflex, until her body knew what to do before her conscious mind finished processing the threat. In her mind, a voice from 8 years ago. Her instructor's voice, rough and certain, echoed during a training drill where she'd faced 3 opponents in a kill house. Control, not kill. Neutralize, don't destroy. That principle had been drilled into her until it became doctrine, became instinct, became the difference between a fighter and a warrior. Jake and Marcus were about to learn that difference. Jake lunged first, exactly as Mara predicted he would. His right hand reached for her shoulder, his weight committed forward, all that football player momentum behind what he thought would be an easy shove. He'd done this 100 times. Intimidate with size, overwhelm with strength, watch people crumble. Mara sidestepped. Not a big movement, just 6 inches to her left, economy of motion, minimal effort. Jake's hand caught nothing but air, and suddenly all that forward momentum had nowhere to go. She caught his extended arm at the wrist and elbow, redirected his movement, and used his own size against him. Basic physics. His weight became his enemy. She guided him past her, maintaining control of his arm, and applied a textbook joint lock. Jake went down to one knee with a grunt of surprise. Not pain. Not yet. Just the shock of finding himself suddenly on the ground when 2 seconds ago he'd been upright and in control. Marcus rushed in from her left, exactly where she'd been watching for him. She'd been waiting for this, had positioned herself specifically to handle both threats. Still controlling Jake's arm, she pivoted, keeping Jake's body between her and Marcus like a shield. Marcus tried to grab her around the waist. She released Jake momentarily, caught Marcus's momentum, and guided him past her into the vinyl booth behind them. He crashed into the seats with enough force to rattle the table, condiment bottles toppling over. Jake scrambled to stand, throwing a wild right hook fueled by rage and embarrassment. Mara didn't block it. Blocking meant meeting force with force, and that wasn't how she'd been trained. Instead, she moved inside the punch, getting closer to him than he expected, redirecting his arm past her shoulder. She stepped behind him in one fluid motion, caught his arm again, and applied another lock. This time Jake went face down on the linoleum floor, hard enough that the impact echoed through the diner. Still no strikes. No punches thrown. Just control, redirection, gravity. Marcus scrambled up from the booth, more cautious now, his grin completely gone. He'd just watched his friend, bigger, stronger, the guy who always won these confrontations, get put on the ground twice in 5 seconds. Stay down, Mara said. Not a request. A command. Marcus didn't listen. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the alcohol still clouding his judgment. Maybe he just couldn't believe what he was seeing. He charged at her from across the narrow aisle between booths. Mara sidestepped again, minimal movement, maximum efficiency. As Marcus rushed past, she extended her leg and tripped him, using his own momentum to send him crashing down hard next to Jake. His shoulder hit first, then his head, not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to stun. Total elapsed time. 8.7 seconds. Both men were on the ground. Jake face down, Marcus on his side, both breathing hard, both struggling to understand how they'd ended up here. Mara stood over them, breathing steady, not even winded, her scrubs still neat, her hospital badge still clipped to her chest. I said stay down. Jake tried to push himself up, his pride unable to accept defeat. Mara adjusted her foot position near his extended arm. Not touching him, but positioned so that any movement he made would put pressure on the same joint she'd locked earlier. He screamed, not from pain but from pure frustration, from the realization that he was completely helpless, that this woman had dismantled him without breaking a sweat. Marcus stayed down, hands up in surrender. Okay, we're done. The diner remained silent except for the 2 men's heavy breathing and the distant sound of sirens. Someone had called the police. Around them, phones were still recording. 4 different angles capturing the same 8 seconds of footage that would be uploaded, shared, analyzed, and watched millions of times. 7 years of hospital work. 7 years of saving lives, of choosing healing over hurting, of building a reputation as a dedicated nurse who never lost her cool. Thousands of patients cared for. Countless lives improved or saved. And in 8 seconds, Mara's carefully buried past came roaring back. The phones captured every moment, every sidestep, every lock, every controlled takedown. And somewhere, in an office that wouldn't open for another 7 hours, a hospital administrator would eventually watch this video, would see their employee using skills that had nothing to do with nursing, would make a decision that would cost Mara everything she'd built. But that was later. Right now, standing in the diner with broken glass scattered around her and 2 men on the floor, Mara felt only one thing. Her sister was safe. At table 3, someone's phone screen showed the upload progress bar completing. The caption was already written. Nurse goes beast mode on 2 bullies face screaming in fear. Fire #justice #don't mess with nurses. The video had begun its journey. The police arrived 4 minutes later, 2 patrol cars with lights painting the diner in alternating red and blue. Officers Ramirez and Chun came through the door with hands on their belts, ready for whatever violence had been reported, and found instead a strange tableau. 2 men on the floor, a woman in nurse scrubs standing calmly nearby, and a crowd of witnesses all talking at once. Jake was the first to speak, his voice loud and indignant, already constructing his narrative. Officers, thank God. That woman assaulted us. We were just sitting here having dinner, and she attacked us for no reason. Marcus, still on the floor, nodded vigorously. She came at us out of nowhere. We didn't do anything. We were just eating. Officer Ramirez held up one hand for silence, her dark eyes scanning the scene with practiced assessment. Everyone calmed down, one at a time. What happened here? Then 8 different voices erupted simultaneously, witnesses eager to correct the lie they'd just heard. The elderly couple from the corner booth, the truck driver from the counter, the young woman who'd been studying, the cook who'd emerged from the kitchen, even Jerry, still shaken from being shoved, his voice cutting through the chaos. I have it on video, someone called out. Me too, said another. I recorded the whole thing. Officer Chin stepped forward. Everyone who has video, please stay. We'll need to see those. 4 phones appeared immediately, then 5, then 8. The officers watched the footage from multiple angles. Jake shoving Jerry, Jake and Marcus cornering Ivy, Jake grabbing her wrist, the violent shove that sent her crashing into the table. And then Mara's intervention, captured in perfect clarity from every possible perspective. Officer Ramirez looked up from the 4th phone, her expression hardened. She walked over to where Jake was now sitting up, still protesting his innocence. Sir, you shoved the manager first. That's assault. Then you grabbed this young woman by the wrist against her will. That's battery. Then you physically threw her into furniture. That's aggravated assault. She turned to Marcus. And you cornered her with your buddy, blocked exits, and participated in intimidating her. That's conspiracy to commit assault. But Jake started. She defended her sister. Officer Chin interrupted, his voice flat and final. After you assaulted her. We have 8 videos showing exactly what happened. Turn around. The handcuffs clicked into place on Jake's wrists, then Marcus's. The sound was satisfying in its finality. Assault, battery, theft of services, conspiracy to commit assault. Officer Ramirez recited as she guided Jake toward the door. You have the right to remain silent. Jake wasn't silent. That bitch assaulted me. Look at my arm. She hurt me. Officer Ramirez stopped, examined his extended arm with professional thoroughness. Not a mark. Not a bruise. Not even redness. She looked at Jake with something approaching pity. I don't see any marks. But I have you on 4 different videos assaulting a young woman half your size. Your friend too. Have a seat in the car. Marcus went quietly, the reality of consequences finally penetrating his alcohol-fogged brain. Jake raged all the way to the patrol car, his voice carrying back through the open diner door, still trying to rewrite a story that had already been recorded from 8 different angles. Paramedics arrived shortly after, drawn by the same 911 call. They checked Ivy first, minor bruising on her hip and shoulder, small cuts on her palms from the broken glass, but nothing requiring hospital attention. They offered to take her in for observation. She declined. Mara held her sister while the paramedic cleaned and bandaged Ivy's hands, and Ivy was crying. Not from pain but from shock, from delayed fear, from the overwhelming relief of being safe. You didn't have to do that, Ivy whispered against Mara's shoulder. What if you get in trouble? Mara pulled back just enough to look her sister in the eyes. You're my sister. There's no what if. There's only always. One of the witnesses, the truck driver, a man in his 50s with kind eyes, approached them cautiously. "Ma'am, that was incredible. Where did you learn to do that?" Mara's expression shuddered immediately, the wall going back up. "Just training. Long time ago." She didn't elaborate, and something in her tone suggested the conversation was over. Mara thought it was over then. The bullies were in handcuffs, being driven to the county jail. Ivy was safe, bandaged, held. Justice had been served without anyone being seriously hurt. She'd done what needed doing, and now life could return to normal. But while she held her sister in that diner, while witnesses gave statements and officers took notes, and the paramedics packed up their equipment, the video was being shared 14,000 times per minute across every social media platform. The algorithm had recognized something viral, justice, violence, an underdog victory, and was pushing it to millions of feeds. At 7 o'clock the next morning, Mara's phone would ring. The caller ID would show her supervisor's number. And the words she'd hear would break her heart and change everything she'd worked for. By midnight, the video had been uploaded to TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook from 8 different accounts. By 12:30, it had been shared 2,000 times. By 1 in the morning, 20,000. The algorithm recognized what it was seeing: conflict, resolution, justice served, an underdog victory, and began pushing it to millions of feeds across the country. The comment sections exploded like wildfire. "That nurse is a hero." Read the top comment with 43,000 likes. "She handled 2 guys like it was nothing," someone else wrote, and the replies beneath it stretched into hundreds of messages, each one more enthusiastic than the last. Skills. Where'd she learn that? The way she controlled both of them without even breaking a sweat. Anyone know who she is? I want to hire her as my bodyguard. Protect that waitress at all costs. Those guys got humbled, thought they were tough, until they met someone actually trained. By 3 in the morning, news outlets had picked it up. Local stations first, then regional, then national. Viral video. Nurse defends sister from 2 diner bullies, read the headlines. Morning shows were already planning segments. Producers were trying to track down contact information for interviews. Self-defense instructors and martial arts experts began posting breakdown videos, analyzing the footage frame by frame. One video titled "Professional Analyzes Viral Diner Takedown" accumulated 3 million views in 2 hours. The instructor, a former military combat trainer, walked through every movement Mara made. "Notice she never strikes first," he explained, pausing the video at key moments. "This is textbook defensive tactics. She's using redirection, not force. Watch how she positions herself to see both threats simultaneously. That's not luck, that's training. Advanced training. And the way she controls that joint lock? Most people would have panicked with 2 attackers. She's calm, clinical. This woman has serious skills." By 6 in the morning, the video had 4 million views. News vans were already pulling up outside the Redmore Diner, hoping to interview witnesses, to capture footage of the location where this moment of justice had occurred. By noon, 11 million views. Someone had identified Ivy and created a GoFundMe for her college fund without asking permission first. Help send Ivy Lane to college, the waitress who stood up to bullies. The description included screenshots of her jar of savings, details about her mother's cancer treatment, her dreams of becoming a teacher. Within 6 hours, $50,000 had poured in from strangers across the country who'd watched the video and wanted to help. The messages accompanying the donations told their own story. "My daughter was bullied in high school. Thank you for standing up. This is what courage looks like. You both deserve better than what those men did. I'm a nurse too. Mara is one of us. We protect people. That's what we do. Your sister is a hero. You're a hero for staying brave. Take my money and get that education." America had fallen in love with Mara Lane. Strangers who'd never met her were calling her a hero, sending money to her sister, sharing her story with hashtags like #NurseHero and #SisterlyLove and #JusticeServed. The video was being played on repeat on cable news, discussed on podcasts, analyzed by everyone from feminists celebrating a woman defending herself to self-defense advocates using it as a teaching tool. But while millions of people were celebrating Mara, one person was watching the video with growing concern. Dr. Patricia Holloway, nursing supervisor at Redmore General Hospital, sat in her home office at 6:45 in the morning with her coffee growing cold beside her laptop. She'd been tagged in the video by 3 different people, all of them saying variations of "This is one of your nurses." She'd watched it 4 times now, her expression growing grimmer with each viewing. She picked up her phone and dialed 2 numbers. First, Human Resources, then the hospital's legal department. The conversations were brief and clinical. Phrases like liability concerns and conduct policy and violent behavior were used. Questions were raised about workplace reputation, about what patients might think, about insurance implications and potential lawsuits. America had fallen in love with Mara. They were calling her a hero, celebrating her courage, sending money to her sister to help with college. But her hospital, the institution she'd served faithfully for 7 years, had questions. Questions about liability, about violence, about a viral video that made their employee famous for what they saw as all the wrong reasons. Those questions would lead to a decision that would transform public opinion overnight, that would make the same people who called Mara a hero turn their anger toward Redmore General Hospital. That would teach an institution what happens when you punish someone for doing the right thing. At 7 o'clock, Dr. Holloway dialed one more number. Mara's cell phone. She practiced what she would say while it rang, but there was no good way to deliver this kind of news. The call came at 7 o'clock that morning, while Mara was sleeping off the exhaustion of the previous night. Her supervisor's voice was careful, measured, deliberately neutral. "Mara, I need you to come in for a meeting this afternoon. 3 o'clock. Human Resources." That was all. No explanation. No context. Just the time and location and a tone that made Mara's stomach drop. She arrived at the hospital at 1 o'clock for her scheduled shift, the viral video still spreading across the internet, while she checked vitals and administered medications and did her job the way she always had. Her colleagues kept glancing at her, some with admiration, some with concern, all of them having seen the video by now. One of them squeezed her shoulder as she passed. "You did the right thing," the older nurse whispered. At 3 o'clock, Mara walked into the Human Resources conference room exhausted from 2 hours of work on top of almost no sleep. Sitting at the long table were 2 people, Janet Kershaw from HR, a woman Mara had met exactly once during her initial hiring, and Richard Brennan, the hospital administrator. A man in an expensive suit whom Mara had only ever seen at mandatory staff meetings, always talking about efficiency and liability and protecting the hospital's interests. Neither of them stood when she entered. Neither smiled. "Have a seat, Mara," Brennan said, gesturing to the chair across from them like she was being called to the principal's office. She sat. "We've seen the video," Brennan began without preamble. Mara's hands tightened in her lap. "I was protecting my sister from." Brennan held up one hand, cutting her off. "The behavior displayed in that video is inconsistent with our values and professional standards as a healthcare institution." The words were clearly rehearsed, probably cleared by the legal department. Corporate speak designed to create distance between the decision and the human being it affected. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence of any kind," Janet added, her voice softer but no less final. "I didn't initiate violence," Mara said, keeping her voice level even as her heart began to race. "2 men were attacking my sister. I stopped them using minimal force. No one was seriously injured." "You physically engaged with 2 individuals," Janet interrupted, reading from a printed document in front of her. "That constitutes a violation of our Employee Code of Conduct, Section 4, Paragraph 3. Staff members must refrain from any behavior that could be construed as violent or aggressive, whether on or off hospital premises." Brennan leaned forward, his expression somewhere between sympathetic and impatient. "We're terminating your employment, effective immediately." The words hit Mara like a physical blow. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was hearing. "I used defensive tactics. I protected someone who was being assaulted. No one was seriously hurt. I did everything right." "You created a liability for this hospital," Brennan said flatly. "What if those men decide to sue? What if patients see that video and perceive you as violent? What if staff members think it's acceptable to engage in physical altercations?" Mara felt something cold settle in her chest. "Patients see me as someone who stands up for people who can't defend themselves. My colleagues see someone who protected her family. That video shows me stopping violence, not causing it." "The decision is final," Brennan said, standing up in a clear signal that this meeting was over. "Collect your things from your locker." Security will escort you out of the building. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file. You'll receive information about Cobra Health Insurance continuation within 10 business days. The walk from the conference room to the staff locker room felt endless. Mara's legs moved automatically, one foot in front of the other, while her mind struggled to catch up with what had just happened. 7 years. 7 years of double shifts and difficult patients and emergencies where she'd saved lives. 7 years of being called reliable, dedicated, invaluable. Erased in a 10-minute meeting. Her colleagues were waiting when she reached the lockers. Word had spread the way it always did in hospitals, fast and through whispered conversations. Some of them were crying. Others looked angry. Linda, a nurse who'd worked alongside Mara for 5 years, pulled her into a fierce hug. "This is wrong," Linda whispered. "Everyone knows this is wrong." Mara packed her locker mechanically. Spare scrubs. Her stethoscope. The thank you cards patients had given her over the years. A photo of Ivy and their mother. Everything that made this space hers, stuffed into a canvas bag while a security guard stood nearby, watching her like she might steal something. She walked out of Redmore General Hospital at 3:45 in the afternoon, carrying her scrubs in a bag and 8 years of nursing experience that suddenly meant nothing. She'd saved her sister from 2 men who together outweighed her by 300 pounds. She'd protected someone who couldn't protect themselves. She'd done everything her training, both military and medical, had taught her to do. And she'd lost everything else. Or so she thought. If you think this hospital is dead wrong for firing Mara, comment "Rehire Mara" right now and hit that like button. Let's make sure corporate America knows they can't punish heroes for protecting their families. The news broke at 6 o'clock that evening. Hospital fires nurse who defended sister from 2 attackers in viral video. The internet exploded. Within 2 hours, #RehireMara was trending nationally, climbing to number 3 on Twitter's trending topics list. Redmore General Hospital's Facebook page was flooded with 1-star reviews, their rating plummeting from 4.2 stars to 1.8 overnight. The comments were brutal and unrelenting. "You fired a hero. I'll never go to this hospital again. She defended her sister from 2 men and you punish her." By morning, protesters gathered outside the hospital entrance carrying signs. "Rehire Mara. Nurses deserve better. Standing up isn't violence." Local news crews arrived to cover the growing demonstration, interviewing anyone willing to speak. An elderly woman, tears in her eyes, told the reporter, "Mara took care of my mom during chemotherapy. She held her hand through the worst days. She's the best nurse I've ever met." Those 2 men attacked her sister, and she stopped them without seriously hurting anyone. "This hospital should be ashamed," a young father holding his daughter added. "If someone attacked my daughter and a bystander stepped in, I'd call them a hero. This hospital called her a liability. That tells you everything you need to know." The hospital issued a statement that afternoon. Richard Brennan stood before cameras, clearly uncomfortable, reading from a prepared script. "We stand by our decision. We cannot condone violence in any form." A reporter called out, but she was defending her sister from 2 attackers. No further comment. Brennan turned and walked away, leaving the press conference after less than 30 seconds. The backlash intensified. "They won't even defend their own decision," became the rallying cry across social media. The hospital thought issuing a statement would end it. They'd miscalculated badly. Because while they were losing patients, reputation, and revenue, Mara was getting phone calls. Lots of them. From hospitals across the state. From security firms. From training academies. And one of those calls was about to change everything. Sarah Chun, an investigative journalist for the local NBC affiliate, started digging into Mara's background 3 days after the firing. What began as a simple follow-up story became something far more significant when she accessed public military records and discovered that Mara Lane's service history wasn't just impressive, it was extraordinary. Not just military. Elite special operations. 8 years in units most people don't know exist. Specialized training in close-quarters combat, hostage rescue, high-value target protection. Multiple combat deployments to classified locations. Honorable discharge with commendations that were themselves partially redacted. Sarah's article published Friday morning. Viral nurse was elite special forces operator. Video shows textbook restraint against 2 attackers. She'd managed to interview Mara's former commanding officer under condition of anonymity. His words were damning in their praise. If Mara had wanted to hurt those men, they'd be in the ICU. What that video shows is someone with elite training who used the absolute minimum force necessary to neutralize two threats while protecting an innocent person. That's harder than knocking someone out. That takes discipline most people can't comprehend. A combat instructor broke down the footage frame by frame. Watch how she positions herself to see both attackers. How she uses their size and momentum against them. How she never strikes, only controls. This is someone who could have ended that fight in 2 seconds with devastating force. Instead, she chose 8 seconds of controlled de-escalation. That's the difference between a fighter and a warrior. The article went viral faster than the original video. 15 million views in 12 hours. The comment sections transformed. She was special forces? Those guys are so lucky she showed restraint. Hospital fired a literal trained warrior for protecting her sister. She went from protecting our country to protecting her family and got punished for it. Suddenly, the video looked different. This wasn't luck. This was a warrior who'd spent 8 years in the most elite military units in the world, who chose to become a nurse, who chose healing over hurting, who could have destroyed those 2 men in seconds but didn't. And the hospitals that had reached out to her, they weren't just offering jobs anymore. They were competing for her. 6 months later, the world looked entirely different for the Lane sisters. Ivy sat in her first semester nursing class at State University, a full-ride scholarship covering tuition, books, and housing. The GoFundMe had raised $127,000 total, far more than anyone could have imagined. Their mother was in remission, her treatments fully covered by insurance that finally kicked in and community support that refused to let her struggle. She was gaining weight, regaining strength, talking about getting back to her garden. Mara worked at Metropolitan General Hospital, 45 minutes away in the city. They'd recruited her specifically after the story broke, the chief of staff calling personally. "We want someone with your experience, judgment, and courage. Someone who knows how to protect patients and staff." The pay was $15,000 more annually. The benefits were comprehensive. But more importantly, they'd created a leadership role for her, training hospital security and nursing staff in de-escalation and emergency response, teaching them how to stay calm when chaos erupts, how to protect yourself and others without escalating violence. Her classes became the highest-rated training program in the hospital system. Jake served 18 months probation with 200 hours of community service and mandatory anger management. Marcus got 12 months probation and 150 hours community service. Both were permanently banned from the Redmore Diner. The viral video followed them everywhere. Job applications rejected, dates ghosting them after Googling their names, strangers recognizing them and walking away. Redmore General Hospital lost 30% of their emergency room patients within 3 months. They issued a public apology, too late, too hollow. 3 board members resigned under pressure. Their reputation never fully recovered. The diner thrived. They named their best-selling breakfast the Mara Special. Eggs, bacon, toast, terrible coffee. A plaque hung on the wall. "Stand up. Stand strong. Stand together." Mara and Ivy sat in that same booth, where everything had changed. Between them sat a new jar labeled Ivy's Medical School Fund. Mara added a $20 bill. "I made you a promise," Mara said. "I keep my promises." Ivy smiled. "You did more than keep it. You changed everything." Mara looked around the diner, at Jerry waving from behind the counter, at customers who nodded respectfully, at the warmth of a place that had become sacred. "No," she said softly. "We changed everything. Together." They clinked their coffee mugs, and the sound echoed like a promise kept. 1 moment. 8 seconds. 2 men who thought size and numbers meant power. 1 woman who knew that real strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice to protect the people you love. Mara lost a job that day, but she gained something bigger, proof that standing up, even when it costs you everything, is always worth it. The video has 89 million views now, but the real story isn't the takedown. It's what happened after. It's Ivy in nursing school. It's their mother healthy. It's a community that rallied around 2 sisters when an institution failed them. It's the promise Mara made in a hospital room 6 months before that night, and kept, no matter what. If this story moved you, if you believe in standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything, subscribe to this channel. Because every story we tell here is about ordinary people who did extraordinary things when it mattered most. Comment, I stand for justice, if Mara's courage inspired you. And if you think more people need to hear this story, that heroes shouldn't be punished for doing the right thing, share this video. Tag someone who needs to know that protecting family is never wrong. Thank you for watching. And remember, the world needs more Maras. More people who protect. More people who stand up when it's easier to sit down. Be that person.